The last time that we visited with each other, I was telling you that I've been called to Washington, D.C. to testify on Captain McVeigh's trial. I went twice. They sent me up there twice. I gave testimony both times, and they had dropped the charge of failure to give proper abandoned ship orders, but they did not drop the negligence of not zigzagging. Now at that time, it was under the captain's discretion whether or not to zigzag. And of course that means going several hundred yards one way and turning just a little and going another, thinking that it might disorient, or the submarines, if there was one ahead, might not have an angle of attack. But it was really of no avail. Japanese had good subs, they had good captains, and actually the captain of the submarine, I-48, came to the trial. The Navy brought him from Japan to testify against our captain. It had never in the history of the United States anything like that ever happened. And he got over there and he said that he would have sunk us whether we were zigzagging or what, because he was in position with his ship, and that he had fired 6 torpedoes at us that night, and 2 of them hit us. And they fired them like a fan motion, and so he was going to get us anyway. And he actually was better witness for McVeigh than he was against him, but that didn't deter the Navy. They were going to convict somebody for the disaster, and they found Captain guilty. Well, they fixed it to where that he couldn't be back on sea duty. See, his granddad and his daddy were admirals, and they were from a long line of sea-going people, and McVeigh was a very bright and up-and-coming captain, and so they fixed it to where that he wouldn't be having any duty except on the land and all, and they blamed him, and everybody, all the people, the daddies and mothers, the sisters and brothers of the sailors that were drowned and killed, the 880 men, blamed the captain because he was, the Navy said he was guilty. And it was only until some of us decided that the captain was getting a bum rap and the ship was getting a bum rap, and we began to fight back, and we as survivors began to write letters to the congressman. We began to get petitions and tell our story and tell that the captain did nothing wrong. And he made one reunion, I believe it was 65 or 66. He was reluctant to come, and there was not one man, and still not one man there blamed him for the sinking. And he came, and he was so thrilled that none of the men were against him. And later on, why, he kept, every Christmas he'd get mail from the parents and all, and saying, if it hadn't been for you, Captain McVeigh, our son would be with us this Christmas. Finally, he broke and shot himself in his front door of his home, and took out his Navy revolver and killed himself. And it was a tragedy. And we tried for 15 years trying to get somebody, some congressman or somebody to pay attention. Couldn't do it. Finally, a young kid, he's 11-year-old, in Florida, was watching Jaws, the movie Jaws. And in Jaws, if you remember, the old captain was telling why he hated sharks, and he said, I'm a crewman of the USS Indianapolis, and he began to tell how many sharks ate people and all, and this young kid was watching TV. His name was Hunter Scott, and he and his daddy was watching this movie, and he said, Daddy, was there really an Indianapolis? And his daddy said, I think there was. Why don't you research it? So he went down to the library, and the kid found information. And then he began to put ads in the paper. Anybody that knows a survivor of the Indianapolis, please call this number. Well, one of my good buddies that boarded the ship, named Maurice Bell, that lived in Mobile, Alabama, got word. He saw the ad or got word some way, and he called Hunter Scott. And bless his heart, Maurice passed away about 6 months ago. And as it has a lot of the other buddies, but that started Hunter Scott. As a kid, he began to talk to his congressman. He went with his congressman to Washington, D.C. He knocked on doors with senators and legislators and saying, listen, you've done an injustice. And finally, the media picked it up. You know what better than an 11, 12-year-old boy to be in Washington knocking on doors? The media picked it up. 2020 got it. In fact, I was asked and flew to Boston and met with 2020, and they had a segment about the ship, a 20-minute segment, and there's 4 of us that went, survivors of us, and Lynn Scherer, who was on the 2020 team, came aboard a ship, USS Salem. It was a heavy cruiser that was docked in under wraps there in Boston Harbor. So we did the filming of that segment there. And a few months later, I was called by 2020, and she said, did you know that we were nominated for an Emmy on that program? Well, they went ahead a year later and showed it again, rerun that. And so as time went on, more and more people knew about the Indianapolis. And the people that, the relatives that blamed the captain no longer blamed him. And it ended up in the year 2000, Congress, both houses, passed a resolution saying that the captain of the bay was not at fault, should not have been court-martialed, and we got it in his record, the Navy. And thank goodness, after, well, from 1945 at the sinking to 2000 is how long it took to get him exonerated. But he still has one son that's living, about 90 years old, and he had 2 sons, and this one is still living, and he's up in Maryland. And that pretty well tells part of the story.